April 12, 2002, 7:50 a.m. People were coming out of their homes to see the fire. The gunfire they ignored, they were used to that, but the explosions were a novelty. Rose paused in the hallway to pull on a jacket. She was conspicuous in the sleek black fight suit, but not so much that she would draw an unusual amount of attention. This was the big city, after all. Shouldering the pack, she hurried off down the street, hunched over like someone eager to get away from whatever trouble brewed up the street behind her, which was only the truth. No one gave her more than a passing glance. The guns were back in the bag and she felt naked without them. Well, not entirely naked. The fight suit was laden with hidden weapons. Small stuff, emergency only, so she'd have to rely mostly on her wits or her fists. She smiled at that. She was very good with her fists. The taller apartment buildings and storefronts gave way to modest brownstones with tiny front yards along tree-lined streets. The cars parked along the curb were different too. Volvos replaced Volkswagens while gas-hungry SUVs and economical Japanese imports vied for the same spaces. It only served to remind her that she'd never owned a car, had never wanted to. Not that she didn't use them. It would be ridiculous for an assassin to rely too much on taxis or public transit. Speaking of which, she hadn't seen a cab in a while. She was starting to get a little tired when she came across an anomaly in the neighborhood. A fast food restaurant occupied the bottom level of a modest office building next to a busy intersection. The residential area had petered out without her noticing. She shook her head to clear her thoughts as she went inside. Focus, she chastised herself. You're not out of it yet. 10 minutes later, she was back on the street in clothes that drew no attention at all. Faded jeans, light yellow tank top, hiking boots, and a light dusting of makeup combined with cheap plastic jewelry made her look like just another Latino woman, a stereotype. Invisible. She moved away from the restaurant nonchalantly, in no great hurry to be anywhere. When the black Humvee rolled past, she studiously ignored it. From the corner of her eye, she saw the man in khaki leaning out, staring at everyone. Hoping she didn't seem conspicuous, she ducked into a jewelry store. The Humvee passed, but the clerks and customers gave her hard stares. Normally, she would have been provoked to say something, but the ire she felt at being ogled by white people was overshadowed by a larger sense of confusion. Why were they after her? She left the store without a single word being exchanged and stepped to the curb. There were plenty of cabs passing by, but it took several tries before she got a taxi to stop for her. That was the hazard of dressing in such a way that she looked like anything but a killer. All the cabbies saw was her brown skin, and most of the drivers in this part of town were white. They thought it mattered, that the affluent would rather not have a minority driving them around, which was laughable, because they all wanted someone to look down on. Even the ones who were minorities themselves. But maybe white people gave bigger tips to white drivers, and elsewhere a Latino would tip a fellow Latino higher. Economics, not racism, could be what prompted this kind of segregation. At least Rose wanted to believe that. She slid into the back seat of the cab and dropped her pack onto the floor. "Where to?" the driver said in thickly accented English. He had a wide, white-toothed smile contrasting sharply with skin so brown it was nearly black. Rose glanced at his hack license. Ernesto Havarti, she read, Cuban. That would explain why he stopped when others hadn't. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She had an agenda, she knew where she had to go next. But should she? Those men in khaki, she'd thought they were just chasing her away from the scene of the hit, perhaps seeking retribution. Why darts, though? That was easy, they wanted to take her alive. They were after her. 3150 8th Avenue, she said. Her lawyer's address. Not a destination, just a direction to move in. The cabbie absorbed it, translating numbers to a location in his head, then nodded. The cab pulled away from the curb and merged smoothly into traffic. Rose watched the other cars through the window, letting her thoughts drift away. The city was an alien place to her, and always had been despite the fact that she had lived most of her life in it. It was organic, a living entity with a will of its own. The collective will of the citizens, she supposed. She'd moved to the suburbs to get away from it, hoping her son could grow up never knowing the kinds of hardships she had survived. She watched the people on the sidewalks, the businessmen, shopkeepers, police, teens, pregnant ladies, hookers, construction workers, everyone. They all shared that connection to this place of steel and concrete that Rose had never known. Gangs didn't care about the city. They cared about territory. They lived vicariously from day to day, never worrying over the past, not caring about the future, and Rose had been too much a part of that. Too much, too young. Of course, she'd severed those ties, or at least most of them. Along with them had gone her only connection to anything real. Sean had given that back to her, and Philippe. She had grown. She no longer felt the need to identify herself with a label. It was the city that was the empty shell now instead of her. In a way, she felt sorry for the people she passed. They were slaves to circumstance, lashed to the wheel of inevitable progression, with every choice they made bounded on all sides by the choices of others. Not Rose. She was free. Not every chica was offered the same good fortune Rose had enjoyed. She could only call it good in retrospect, though. Living through it had been hell. She could count on one hand the number of people who knew what she really did for a living. Only she knew how many lives she had ended during her career. In so many ways, life had rejected her, and that lifted her above concern for others. At least she liked to think so. Nonetheless, she would not allow those ghosts to haunt her. Her personal demons were trouble enough. Tito, for example. She patted her bag to reassure herself that the divorce papers were still there. The last thread connecting me to what I used to be, she thought. And good riddance. The cab came to a jerky halt at an intersection. The driver leaned out his window to shake his fist and shout curses in Spanish at the car stalled in front of them. A white Chevrolet with the hood raised, a blue-haired old lady behind the wheel, two men hunched over the engine, poking. One of them leaned out to glare at the cabbie and shout a few curses in return. The driver tromped on the gas and whipped the taxi into the next lane. They roared through the intersection an instant after the stoplight turned red. Rose clutched her pack and waited for the shriek of torn metal that never came. "Excuse me, Senora," the cabbie said, glancing at her in his mirror. "No problem," Rose said. She grinned humorlessly. "No es nada." She looked behind them. The intersection was already lost behind a wall of traffic. She was worried about police, thinking of all the weapons she had with her. Instead, she saw a black Humvee in the opposite lane a moment after it had passed, going in the other direction. How many are there? She wondered. She dug into her pack for her cell phone. "Hello," a New York accented voice answered after a few rings. "Tony, it's me," Rose said. "The job's done." "Yeah, I heard," Tony responded. He was a little out of breath, a bit annoyed or maybe distracted. Rose shook her head, wishing she wasn't so paranoid. "The word is out on you, Belladonna. You capped some good fellas along with that Russian trash. Did you know that?" Rose kept her anger in check. Tony was always this way when discussing business. Gruff, condescending, as if he felt a need to keep everyone intimidated. In all the years she'd known him, Tony had never been able to accept the fact that he needed his wheelchair. "Not my fault," she said into the phone. "I expected a smaller crowd." What she left unsaid was that her information had come from him. He heard only what he wanted to hear. "You're supposed to be a professional," he accused. "You told me it'd be a surgical strike. Instead, you waltz in with guns blazing like you were some amateur, and you set the place on fire. What's up with that?" "You've got good sources," Rose said coldly. "Maybe I shouldn't have left a survivor." "Whatever," Tony snapped. "Where are you now?" In a taxi headed downtown, she snapped, growing angry. It was really none of his damn business, but she owed him and felt obligated to respond. "If you need more than that, use the GPS locator in the phone. What does it matter anyway? The target was liquidated. I earned my pay. It's over." She caught the driver's eye in his mirror. He'd been doing that a lot. He saw he'd been caught and smiled sheepishly. You still plan to go through with it? Tony asked, more mellow. You going to retire? I've had enough, Tony. She winked at the driver. His smile grew. It was always nice to be reminded that she was still young and attractive. She had a full life to look forward to. I won't be missed. There are other cowboys in the field. None as good as you, Belladonna. I know. Damn it, Belladonna. Do you really want your last job to be remembered as a fuck-up? Hey, Rose said, anger bursting through. I didn't fuck up a goddamn thing. The order said eliminate Sergei at any cost, at any cost. The timeline said it had to be today. I fulfilled my obligation. If somebody's not happy with it, well, that's just too fucking bad. Whoa, girl, Tony said with a forced laugh. Calm down, it's all good. I didn't mean to get your panties in a wad. Yes, you did, Rose thought bitterly. You never liked the fact that I went independent. She wasn't that naive young woman anymore. She didn't have to take his shit. The driver wasn't smiling anymore either. He might not have understood the English conversation, especially hearing only one side of it, but he could tell by the tone of her voice and the scowl on her face that it wasn't good. He kept his eyes on the road, risking only brief glances back at Rose. The money's in my account, right? She asked Tony in a calmer voice. I'm still waiting for confirmation from Zurich, he said, subdued. But yeah, they paid. Fine, I'll check in again later. She closed the phone with a snap and shoved it angrily into her pack. Son of a bitch, she muttered. Trouble with boyfriend? The cabbie asked hopefully. Rose found herself smiling again. No, my father, nothing I ever do is good enough for him. She shuddered at the thought of Tony actually being her father. That would have been a crime. Me too, the cabbie said. Ernesto, she reminded herself. He has a name. Change of destination, she said. You know where the Snakebite Club is? He shook his head. That's okay, just turn right at the next intersection. You like clubs? Ernesto asked, turning at the corner. A car squealed tires and honked. He ignored it. Yeah, Rose answered. She looked behind them. They'd narrowly missed a collision she saw. A yellow delivery van was sideways in the intersection, the driver holding up his middle finger at the retreating taxi. She started to laugh. Ernesto was fearless. A black Humvee zoomed around the stopped van and the laughter died in her throat. Maybe I take you to club? Ernesto asked. Rose barely heard. The Humvee darted through traffic until it was right behind the cab. She stared into the faces of two men in khaki as they stared back at her. They knew. Somehow they knew who she was. The passenger lifted a chrome-plated .45 and racked the slide back dramatically. Rose got the message. She pulled her bag closer and reached inside for her own weapon. She wasn't afraid. In situations like this, she never was. Is it no? Ernesto asked. Huh? Rose turned halfway back around so she could see him. I take you to club, he repeated. That's what you're doing, she said, distracted. Then, oh, you mean a date. See you a date. His driving wasn't the only bold thing about Ernesto. She glanced at the Humvee. It was trying to come around beside them. Only Ernesto's frenetic driving kept that from happening. Tell you what, Rose said, flashing him her brightest smile. You lose those guys behind us and you've got a date. He seemed to notice the Humvee for the first time. His expression fell slack. Who they? He asked, his English momentarily failing him. INS, Rose lied. Immigration. The look of wide-eyed fear that took over Ernesto's face was just the reaction she'd hoped for. He hesitated a moment before jerking the steering wheel over, changing lanes amid a cacophony of horns and screeching tires. The cab shot forward past slower-moving vehicles, occasionally crossing the median into oncoming traffic. Rose squealed with glee. Drive faster, she urged. The Humvee was falling behind, too large for this kind of driving. Rapido. See, Ernesto agreed. He took a turn at high speed and the rear of the taxi swung around ponderously before fishtailing back into place. Rose laughed as she picked herself up off the floor. Behind them, the Humvee had to slow too much to take the turn. Ernesto slid the cab around another turn. The Humvee appeared a moment later, farther behind. But traffic was getting scarce, and the cab not built for this task was no match for the Humvee's larger motor. Slowly, the distance was closing again. "I have an idea," Rose said. "They aren't after you. Do you understand? It's me they want. Once I'm out of the cab, you're safe. I hope." "See, okay." Ernesto gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles and spoke with a quivering voice. The look in his eyes, though, that was a bravery she knew she could trust. "Your hack license is fake, isn't it?" she asked in a leap of intuition. He hesitated a moment, then nodded. She gave him a smile, real this time. "It'll be okay, you'll be okay." Then she told him her plan. It was simple, daring, and crazy. He said as much, but he agreed to try it. Ernesto took the taxi careening around another turn, then slowed abruptly. "Gracias," Rose said as she jumped out. Less than a minute later, the Humvee rounded the corner and the driver locked down on the brakes. Ernesto was standing beside his cab, staring down an empty-looking alley, hands on his hips, shaking his head as he muttered curses in Spanish. Heavily tinted windows rolled down on the SUV. White faces sporting mirrored sunglasses looked out. "Where is she?" the driver demanded. "Kay," Ernesto replied. He pushed the passenger door closed, watching the men warily. "The woman," the driver repeated. "Where did she go? Your passenger, for Christ's sake." "Sorry," Ernesto replied. "Pero no hablo inglés." "Shit," the man in the backseat spat. "Damn wetback don't speak no English." "Gee, do you think so?" the driver responded. "Ignorant fuck." "Up yours," jerk the backseat man said. "Shut up, both of you," demanded a stern-looking man in the front passenger seat. "It's obvious she's given us the slip again. She's smarter than Jordan led us to believe." "Maybe we should go after her," the driver suggested. The stern-looking man snorted. "You want to chase her down another alley, Kane? Her booby traps took Miller's foot off. We'll let her go for now and pick up her signal later. We know where she has to go." "Yeah, fine," Kane said, scowling, "but you're still an ass, Jones." The stern man growled deep in his throat. Kane shook his head. Ernesto watched the exchange more confused than scared. The windows rolled up and the Humvee roared away. He waited until it was safely out of sight before letting his shoulders sag in relief. He moved to the back of the cab, fumbled with his keys, and opened the trunk. "It worked?" Rose asked, looking up at him from where she was curled into a ball. "See," Ernesto answered and grinned. Rose climbed out quickly. She threw her arms around Ernesto's neck and hugged him tightly. He grunted in surprise and returned her embrace. She pushed him away, gently but firmly. "Gracias," she told him and meant it. "They might come back, though. We should go." She hopped in the cab before the moment could become awkward. Ernesto slid behind the wheel a bit more slowly. He was subdued. He didn't look at Rose in the mirror anymore. Maybe that's best, she told herself. Her eye fell on her pack on the seat beside her. Oh, she'd left it there in her mad dash to reach the trunk. Had they seen it? Certainly the driver had been in a perfect position to do so. If they had, she rationalized, they'd have taken it. Then again. Forget it. They said they'd pick her up later. How would you do it? Her eye fell on the hack license. The taxi? I'd get the taxi's number and check the records. Easy enough. And easy enough to thwart. Ernesto had already demonstrated an eagerness to please. Maybe not as eager as before, but she felt certain he would drop her off, then report a different destination to his dispatcher. She grinned as she considered it. "Ernesto," she asked in Spanish, "what brought you here, to America?" "My uncle lives here," he answered promptly, also in Spanish. "He escaped Castro long ago. I did the same. I came on a boat with many others, and many of them have been sent back to Cuba. I don't want to go back." "That's why you were afraid of INS," she stated, nodding. He shrugged. "In Cuba, everyone fears the secret police. Those men looked very bad to me." She laughed. You're right, very bad men. Do you like driving a cab? His smile faded. It is good work, he said, wavering, and switched to broken English. But I have bad Inglés, hard to get better job, perhaps I too much dark. She'd heard similar tales all her life. Everyone who came to America expected more than they got. Her own grandmother came from Colombia as a teenager. She'd been shocked to learn that here in America, the land of golden opportunity, she was a second-class citizen. After all, with her pale skin and golden hair, she never expected to be labeled a minority. It wasn't so much that America was a land of white privilege as it was a place of wealthy privilege. Old wealth was top of the pyramid, and most of that belonged to whites. The poor, especially those from other countries, and doubly so for those whose skin was many shades removed from Caucasian, had it worst. But despite it all, Rose knew there was nowhere else on earth with as much opportunity for achievement or possibility of heartbreak. It was just a matter of recognizing the right path to take and having the fortitude to stay on it, no matter how many people she had to kill. New destination, she said. She rattled off an address from memory. It was a poor section of town. It was no surprise that Ernesto knew where it was. Let the khaki guys trace her. They'd come after her anyway, best to do it on her turf. Belladonna could handle 4 men even if they were professionals. The real question was who hired them. She glanced at her watch. Tito would be at the club at least until 1. She had time to kill. Literally. Catch me if you can, she thought, and laughed.